When we think of Europe, we picture gleaming infrastructure, world-class healthcare, top-tier education and enviable safety standards. And yes, that's true, kind of. But there is another side to this story. Europe isn't one seamless, wealthy continent. In reality, it's divided economically, socially and historically. In Western Europe, countries like Germany and France boast mean wealth per adult averages well over 200,000 euros. Meanwhile, many Eastern European nations face a much different reality. Take Bulgaria, where wealth per adult hovers around 44,000 euro, a mere fraction of what's typical in the West. And if we compare the extremes, the gap is staggering. Switzerland's mean wealth is over 650,000 euros, while in Serbia it's less than 33,000 euro, a difference of over 20 times. How did such a dramatic wealth divide develops within one continent, and why does it persist? Today we uncover the 7 surprising reasons behind the East-West economic divide, reasons rooted in history and still affecting millions across Europe. Guys, hit a like button, subscribe, and let's find out why the Eastern Europe is much poorer than the Western. After World War II, Eastern Europe fell under the control of communist regimes that imposed strict state-run economies. For over 40 years, innovation and entrepreneurship were stifled, with governments owning almost everything, from factories to farms. People had jobs, but they didn't own businesses, so there was little room for creativity or personal growth. When communism fell in the late 1980s, these countries faced an abrupt shift to capitalism. Suddenly, government industries were sold off or shut down, and millions of workers were left scrambling for jobs. The region's GDP fell sharply, by over 15% in some places, a massive economic collapse. This rapid transition left deep scars on Eastern Europe's economies, which many are still recovering from today. In places like Albania, the legacy of communism's failure is clear. It's one of the poorest countries in Europe even now. Guys, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree that a country's historical background plays a key role in shaping its economic development today? After the fall of communism in 1989, millions of Eastern Europeans sought better opportunities in the West. With economies in turmoil and wages far lower than in Western Europe, many citizens left in search of jobs, higher living standards and greater freedom. This mass exodus significantly drained the region's workforce. One of the most damaging effects of this migration was the brain drain. Young, educated and skilled professionals like teachers, doctors, engineers and entrepreneurs were among the first to leave. As they settled in countries like Germany, the UK and the US, they took their expertise with them, depriving their home countries of a talent needed to fuel innovation and growth. The consequences were severe. Local economies lost a crucial part of their workforce, leaving behind an aging population and fewer workers to contribute to the economy. These also led to a sharp decline in the tax revenue, making it harder for governments to invest in infrastructure, education and other key areas. The result? A vicious cycle where immigration hindered economic progress, which in turn pushed even more people to leave in search of better lives. Geography has played a major role in shaping Eastern Europe's economic struggles. Unlike Western Europe, which is surrounded by seas and navigable rivers, much of Eastern Europe is made up of flatlands and rugged mountains. These geographical features have made the region more vulnerable to invasions throughout history, from Mongols to the Nazis. Constant warfare and foreign occupation stunned economic growth, as resources were diverted to defense rather than development. The flatlands, while fertile for agriculture, also made Eastern Europe an easy target for invasions. In contrast, Western Europe benefited from natural borders, mountains and seas that helped protect against invaders, allowing them to build stronger economies and more stable governments. Eastern Europe also faces challenges in terms of trade. Many countries in the region are landlocked or have limited access to major shipping routes, which restricts the ability to engage in global trade efficiently. While Western European nations could establish vast trading empires thanks to their access to seas, Eastern Europe's limited ports and difficult terrain made international commerce much harder, keeping many of its economies isolated for centuries. This geographic disadvantage has meant that Eastern Europe has had to fight harder just to keep up, and its economic development has always been held back by these natural obstacles. Eastern Europe has faced a long history of devastating conflicts that have deeply affected its economy. During World War II, the region was hit hard. Cities were destroyed, industries collapsed, and an estimated 20 million people in Eastern Europe lost their lives. The war left entire economies in ruins, and it took decades to rebuild. For example, Poland's GDP shrunk by 30% during the war, and many other countries in the region suffered similar losses. In the 1990s, the breakup of Yugoslavia led to bloody civil war. These conflicts devastated the Balkans, with an estimated 140,000 people killed and millions displaced. Infrastructure was destroyed, and the economy of countries like Serbia, Bosnia, and Croatia took years to recover. For instance, Croatia's GDP dropped by 50% during the war, and many businesses never reopened. The impact of conflict continues to be felt today, especially with the ongoing war in Ukraine. Since Russia's invasion in 2022, Ukraine's economy has taken a massive hit, with its GDP dropping by around 29%. The war has displaced over 10 million people, and key industries like steel and agriculture have been severely disrupted, setting the country back in its efforts to grow. The long history of wars in the region has left Eastern Europe with deep economic wounds, making it harder for these countries to catch up to wealthier nations in the West. Eastern Europe industrialized much later than Western Europe, which put it at a big disadvantage. While countries in Western Europe began their industrial revolution in the 18th century, Eastern Europe didn't start until 20th century under communist rule. Many Eastern European countries were still largely agricultural, when the West had already built strong industries and economies. When communism took control, it forced the region to rapidly build heavy industries like steel and coal mining, but without the proper infrastructure or innovation, these industries were often inefficient, producing goods that were outdated or of poor quality. In countries like Poland and Bulgaria, state-run factories used outdated equipment, and workers were not trained for modern business practices. After communism ended in the 1990s, many of these industries struggled to compete with the West. For example, Poland's industrial output fell by 30% during the early years of capitalism because it was so reliant on old, inefficient factories. Meanwhile, Western European countries had already embraced technology and innovation, allowing them to build modern, competitive economies. In the 19th century, Western Europe's industrial revolution sparked a period of rapid growth, setting countries like Germany, the UK, and France on a path to becoming global economic powers. Their early industrialization gives them better infrastructure, higher levels of education, and access to global markets, advantages that Eastern Europe lacked and is still trying to catch up with. Governance in Eastern Europe has been a major obstacle for economic growth, with corruption being a key issue. According to Transparency International 2023 Corruption Perception Index, countries like Bulgaria and Romania are among the most corrupt in Europe. This corruption deters foreign investments. Studies show that for every 1 point increase in a country's corruption score, foreign direct investment drops by 3–5%. This is particularly true in nations like Hungary and Ukraine, where bribery and political corruption are widespread. Weak governance also leads to uneven wealth distribution. In countries like Serbia and Moldova, over 20% of the population lives below the poverty line. This inequality limits economic growth potential. Poor governance and corruption prevents Eastern Europe from creating a stable environment that attracts investments, encourages innovation, and provides jobs, slowing down their economic development. After the shift from the communism, Eastern Europe faced economic inefficiencies and market fragility. State-owned industries were privatized quickly, but many struggled to adapt to the competitive market. In contrast, Western Europe had a long history of market-driven economies, which helped businesses thrive. Eastern Europe also lacked the venture capital and startup culture that Western Europe enjoys. For instance, in 2023, venture capital investment in Eastern Europe was just $4 billion, compared to over $50 billion in Western Europe. This gap hinders innovation and slows down the growth of new businesses. The lack of financial markets and investment options also limits economic development. Eastern European countries have far fewer stock market listings and fewer opportunities for businesses to raise capital. As a result, these economies are less flexible and more prone to market shocks, making it harder for them to compete with the more diversified economies in the West. Cultural and religious differences have played a significant role in shaping Eastern and Western Europe's economic past. Western Europe, largely influenced by Protestantism and the values of individualism and innovation, developed economies based on free markets, capitalism, and a focus on individual achievement. Meanwhile, Eastern Europe, with its Orthodox Christian and Catholic traditions, has often had a stronger focus on communal values and state intervention, leading to more centralized economic control. These historical divides affect financial decision-making today. In the West, individual well-being, entrepreneurship, and private investment are often encouraged. In Eastern Europe, by contrast, there is a greater reliance on government-led initiatives, which can be slower and less flexible in responding to market changes. Social cohesion also plays a role. Western societies often benefit from stronger trust in institutions and culture of transparency, while Eastern Europe grapples with historical divisions and lower levels of trust in both government and financial systems that can dampen economic progress. This cultural gap continues to impact how business decisions are made and how money flows within the economy, contributing to slower economic development in the East. So, is Eastern Europe still lagging behind Western Europe? It's a mix of history, geography, and tough transition. Decades of communism left scars that are hard to shake off, and while countries in the East have worked hard to catch up, they face challenges like corruption, weak economies, and even cultural divides that slow progress. But the story isn't over. Countries in Eastern Europe are growing, attracting investment and changing fast. Over the past few decades, some have made remarkable strides in improving infrastructure, education, and business opportunities. With the right investments, reforms, and leadership, Eastern Europe could close the gap with the West much quicker than we think. I truly believe that while the road to prosperity might be long, the potential of this region is undeniable. Guys, what do you think? Do you agree, or do you feel that Western Europe's level of economic development is still out of reach for Eastern Europe? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video so you won't miss our next episodes. See you very soon.